Welcome to Growlers and Gremlins. I'm John, and our star-studded cast this week includes...
What's up, fuckers? It's Brian.
And?
Jason, the analyst.
Victor, I return.
The brown one.
Yes, mustachioed Mexican muchacho.
Yeah.
Ramathorn.
And Austin, first time.
First time.
Second, well, okay. You were scheduled before.
I missed.
But this is your first time, and it's unscheduled, so this is nice. And we have it with Victor.
We're making up for the fuck up.
We've been waiting on. All right.
Fancy boys.
So, a little bit of a change this week. We've got quite a group together this week, and we decided to, rather than try to agree on a bunch of beers, we decided that everybody would just buy a bottle of something they wanted to try, and we would do hard liquor. So, strap in.
Hard liquor from Solo Cups.
So our drink this week is Aviation Gin, which is Ryan Reynolds' gin company. I've always wanted to try it because, you know, Ryan Reynolds and gin. So
please listen, Ryan.
Here we go.
Yeah, Ryan. You seem to like little people.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a smooth gin.
Where's my mouth?
Do you guys get a little peppermint in there?
Yes, I taste it.
Yeah, that's really nice and smooth.
I still want
Very
the Mountain Dew.
smooth.
It's not nearly as piney as a lot of gins. It's not really citrusy either, though.
No, it's a very straight, dry gin.
You still get the Christmas tree on the nose, though.
No.
Yeah.
It's on the back end.
Oh, it's really nice.
It's quite tasty.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, it's good sipping gin. Nothing really.
Yeah, this is pretty nice.
Ryan, if you are listening, we do like your stuff.
If you are listening.
Yeah,
also,
yeah, of course he's listening, Brian. Of course Ryan Reynolds listens to our podcast.
Hey, we might be on one of his YouTube commercials where he's
our
like...
podcast comes preloaded on Mint Mobile.
Oh, what a deal that would be, though.
Yeah, right? They get all of our episodes for free.
Oh, yes.
Oh, could you imagine?
And one day of the year, Ryan has to say hi to us and pretend to like it.
Well, we can always just tag him on Twitter and see what happens.
Yes, but...
Oh, we should do that because since our our drink this week is Aviation Gin, he's the owner.
I'm feeling a lot of tang on the tongue.
You have to tag both
That's
Ryan Reynolds and Aviation Gin.
And Mint Mobile.
Yes, my notes have arrived.
And Deadpool.
You know, there's only like 140 characters in a tweet, right?
Yeah, it's going to be all tags.
It's all hashtags. Yeah, we should do that. Just post this episode with no description.
It just says
hashtags.
It says sup Ryan hashtag lines. I thought they had 260 characters.
No, it's 140.
No, they upped it to 260. That's why people can make paragraphs.
I thought that was only for specific users, like if you have a blue check mark.
Yeah, blue check marks get special privileges.
Aren't those official?
Ryan.
The blue check marks, they're official pages, right?
Yeah, but they're known as blue check marks.
Oh my god, they're not like official.
They're verified.
They're like, they're
it's a
chosen by
thing.
Twitter.
Yeah, because you can try to verify yourself. You can request to be verified, but they will only choose who gets to be verified.
I don't use the Twitter.
You have to reach a level of notoriety that's undeniable, or just really follow everything that Twitter wants, like ideologically.
Let's not get too far. Ryan
I
might
think
not
more
say
of
hi
the
to us.
latter.
Yeah, it's more of the latter.
Hey, if we get too political, Ryan might not say hi to us.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
He might flip us off. I would live with that.
He does make good gin, though.
Yeah, he does.
Well, he has no part in making it. Come on.
Probably not, but his name's
not.
attached to it.
It is.
Like Ron White.
Yeah,
Not Ron White.
his face was on the bottle.
Who's the guy?
That's Ron
investing.
Swanson.
Yeah,
How
he's
dare
very
you
much
compare
in
Ron White and Ron Swanson
Yeah,
together?
Ron Swanson is far superior.
Well, Ron White is just the older, more alcoholic Ron Swanson.
No. Ron
He
White is
literally
nothing
has
like
a
Ron
joke
Swanson.
where he calls himself Tater Salad.
Does that sound like Ron Swanson to you?
Is the greatest man.
Come on.
You know who's greater than Ron Swanson, though?
Nobody.
Ryan Reynolds.
No.
That's not true. I'm sorry, Ryan. Ron Swanson is way better. His name is
Ron Swanson's fictional.
I think Ryan
he
would
exists
agree,
in our
though.
hearts.
Nick Offerman's a good guy too.
Yeah,
though.
he is pretty cool. I read one of his books. Anyway,
Did his wife kill herself?
What?
What?
No, I'm thinking of a different guy.
Probably Ron White.
No, his wife's alive.
Anyway,
Thinking of the dude from Ghostbusters with the glasses. His wife, I think.
Dan
died.
Aykroyd?
No,
No, with the
Ramis?
glasses.
Harold Ram. No, whoever the dude that was the one possessed. Are you the Lockmaster? That guy.
I don't know. Jason would
The
know.
one from
Oh God, what- it's I can feel
not-
it in my head. I know the name.
Feed Me Seymour. That
Yeah.
guy.
But yeah, Seymour, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ghostbusters.
Oh, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, really getting the name of the actor when you say
That
the movie.
is Rick
Moranis.
Yeah.
He recently was punched in the face in New York.
What?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, he got punched in the face.
For what?
It was tragic. Like, who would punch Rick Moranis?
I think it was just like a random.
It was just a random thing. Like,
Yeah.
somebody just punched him in the face.
It's like,
in the
come on,
street.
man.
They didn't even know who he was. If they had known, they would not have hit Rick Moranis.
Exactly.
Moranis.
So I want to tell you guys a little story.
No, you don't.
In World War II,
Kevin's War?
yes, one of Kevin's wars. This may have actually been Kevin. In World War II, a Chinese man was forced to build a bridge by Japanese soldiers. This was when the Japanese were occupying parts of northern China.
And Central. And Southern.
Well, I'm talking specifically about northern.
So 38.
He finds a treasure and he hides it in a well. So this is like 90 years ago. He finds a treasure and he hides it in a well, or 80 years ago, whenever that was.
He hid this watch in the only place he had available.
His prison wallet.
Recently, he told his grandchildren on his deathbed.
What's his name?
I don't know.
Way to go, research dipshit.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't give the name.
I don't know.
That's from the guy who does no research.
Yeah, but I'm expected to do no research.
No, this week you were expected to, because you said you would.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't promise anything.
Okay, so this man, he was forced to build a bridge by Japanese soldiers. He found a treasure in the process of building this bridge, and he hid it in a well. He told his grandchildren about it on his deathbed recently. His grandchildren found the well in question, and at the bottom of the well, wrapped in a cloth, they found a giant skull.
Crystal Skull?
A skull, like an actual skull. And the skull was... It's not like a ton larger than a human skull, but it's
very predator.
significantly, like, you can tell it's quite a bit bigger.
Predator-esque.
And it appears to be a human skull, but there are some slight differences. They have named it Homo Longi, which means dragon man. So they believe that this was an ancestor that is closely related to the Homo sapien. More closely related to the Homo sapien than the Neanderthal. And it could also be what is called a Denisovian, which was a long-lost Asian ancestor that we only know about through DNA, but they've never actually found any physical evidence of it existing, which was like a transitional human. So it's got a huge skull, a really big brow ridge, and giant molars, and almost square eye sockets. And the eye sockets are huge. So it really just goes to show how little we know about the history of the human species. Like, we're still finding new things. There's still missing links in our ancestry and things like that. And this discovery was just last month that they found this new, closer relative than the Neanderthal. And
Telling me no one ever threw a bucket in that well.
I don't know. I mean,
Brian, this is like your origin story, man. Just listen.
No.
Brian does look like Dragon Man.
I am the chosen. I will free Skyrim from the Stormcloak Horde.
So basically, what I want to talk about this week is giants. Like human giants, sort of.
How big is it?
So
roughly.
How big is what?
That's what
The
she
skull.
said.
I just told you.
You said it's fairly large. That's not like I want to like.
It's not like it's not like double the size of a human skull, but like if like
I'm gonna say Andre the Giant was a pretty big dude. He had a big skull.
yeah,
That's why they called him the Giant.
but
Yeah, but he was around. He's just a guy with gigantism.
this was okay. So picture the difference between a lemon and an orange, or an orange and a grapefruit.
I'm picturing
That's about the difference in size between a human skull and the Dragon Man skull.
Okay, so it sounds
Orange
like
to grapefruit.
we got Scott from Canada, the
like
giant
a third
dude.
bigger.
Yeah, it's maybe 30% larger all around. The eye sockets are much bigger, though. Like, it had big eyes. Let me take a sip of my gin, and we're going to get into giants. Man, my mouth is dry.
The gin does that.
It does, but it was dry before, too. So, when people first think about giants, first things that usually come up
Skyrim.
are not Skyrim.
B505.
If we're trying to talk accuracy, we're trying to think about our possible past. Most people go to the reference in the Bible to Goliath. You know,
no,
not at all.
Mickey Mouse.
That's 100% what
No
I
one
think
here has
first.
ever heard of the story David and Goliath.
Yeah, but that's not the first thing you go to.
When you're trying to think of giants in the past of human history, that's not where you would go to first.
No.
Where would you go to first if you were thinking
Greek.
like
Greek. Yeah, I was going to say Greek.
Greek giants.
Well, we'll get there.
Odysseus.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to find like the oldest recorded,
Yeah,
David
that's
and
Greek.
Goliath.
no, it would not be Greek in this
Well,
case.
the Bible one isn't the oldest.
Old Testament, it does come before the ancient Greek records. Of
Okay, then
giants.
Egyptian
We're
giants.
not talking about the oldest recorded. We're talking about the oldest you think of when it first comes to your mind.
Egyptians.
Anyway,
That doesn't mean keep guessing until you think
Anyway,
of the
we're
oldest.
trying-
Babylonian.
Brian's on a
Mesopotamian.
contrarian streak. He's just trying to cause problems in the episode.
Oh, we are getting that funny intro.
So I'm not placing that intro on this episode. I've put
You're
a
not
lot of work
placing
into
it?
this.
There's also the guy on all the vegetables.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
Jolly Green Giant.
He had to have been around.
Paul Bunyan.
Anyway, so obviously there's the classic story of David and Goliath, which is, you know, David killed a giant with a sling in a war.
Well, how do we know David wasn't just like 3 feet tall
classic.
at that point?
He would have been on average, the average man at that time period would have been about 5.5 feet tall.
Wasn't he kind of young though, or like on the shorter
he was
side?
young at the time.
Yeah, so
but
what's the average height of a Middle Eastern man
Anyway.
2,000 years ago?
I just told you 5.5 feet.
That seems tall.
Anyway, so one of the other things that people think of is the Nephilim, and
The angels?
no, the Nephilim, which is a different thing.
He's told us this story before to try and prove a point.
Yeah, I've actually talked about the Nephilim in previous episodes.
Episode 1.
No, the human fucked angels.
The first reference to the Nephilim. I'm going to get through this episode no matter how much you guys fight it, because I've worked really hard on this.
Uh-huh.
So the first reference to the Nephilim is in Genesis 6:1 through 4, and it says, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives as they chose, or any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." So, the Nephilim were...
Rapey ghosts. Got it.
No, the Nephilim
Zeus.
were... I'm about to...
Let me know when you want me to mute him.
Yeah. Anyway,
I can always yell.
the Nephilim were basically fallen angels, which would be demons. And most people think about it as, oh, you know, angels had sex with humans and all this, but through this process they became fallen angels, which would have been demons, and they reproduced with humans, creating a race called the Nephilim. And the Nephilim varied quite a bit. Some of them were gigantic, some of them had special powers, and the idea of the Nephilim doesn't really go away, even though the flood in the Bible, Noah, the flood, all that was partially to destroy the Nephilim and to clear the earth of them.
How closely in relation would like Nephilim be to like demigods and things like that?
It's essentially like that.
Okay.
So the Genesis account of the flood is preceded by a passage that mentions the Nephilim. The Bible calls Noah blameless in his generation, which could be a reference to Noah's character, but it could also be that Noah was blameless in the sense that his bloodline had not been polluted by the fallen angels. So God saved him and his family to be the beginning of a new genetically clean human race. Just like Jason would like.
I knew it.
Are you saying God is all for cleansing of the DNA strand?
In this case. But So you have the flood, and this is for many purposes, but one of which is to try to cleanse the human race and get rid of the Nephilim, because they were never meant to exist. But the Bible mentions the Anakim, or Anakim, and the Rephaim, or the Rephaim. I don't really know exactly how they're pronounced, after the flood. So either the giant bloodline remained, or it is possible that the fallen angels made a second attempt to pollute mankind after the flood.
They got them animals.
I'm just picturing like a giant doggy paddling through the flood, trying to like outlast.
Well, it's a giant half angel, so it'd probably be like, dumbass, thought you could drown me.
But later it becomes pretty apparent that the flood did not kill all of the giants, or at least all of their bloodline.
Noah was like, well, he said 2 by 2, and those 2 big assholes over there, gotta let them on.
So the first reference we have to giants is in, prehistory times, Old Testament of the Bible, Genesis era, the Nephilim. Which, yes, this does predate ancient Egypt, Brian.
Does it?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Egypt's what, 5,500 years ago?
I know.
The Old Testament is how old?
The Old Testament itself is not old, but the story that it's recording is older. Anyway, so one of the first races post-flood that's mentioned is the Anakim, or the Anakites. And they were a formidable race of giant, warlike people who occupied the lands of southern Israel near Hebron before the arrival of the Israelites.
Did they fight the Obawans?
There's a lot of names really similar to that throughout here. Just wait.
Shut up, Austin.
Anyway, the name Anakim, or Anakim, most likely means long-necked or tall. The Hebrews thought them to be descendants of the Nephilim.
I knew these giraffes didn't belong on this planet.
So, during the time that Moses was taking the Israelites to the promised land that, they're supposed to go to, they sent spies ahead, and there were 12 spies that came back and reported of people great and tall who were terrible to the ears, and something else about the size of them, but basically they were just so gigantic that even when they spoke, it hurt your ears. And they considered themselves to be grasshoppers in their sight. So, scale-wise, grasshopper to human.
That's a pretty giant-ass giant. That's not a David to Goliath.
No, that's what I was going to say. Like, these were reported to be, like, massive.
Well, they don't give a specific size on that sighting.
That's what I'm saying. Like, they're descriptors.
That's like Jaeger size.
Yeah, they reported it. I think they exaggerated a bit, given the measurements we get later on some of the
yeah, of course.
giants that they actually encounter.
But they were also seeing them from a distance.
Yeah, the Shadow of the Colossus is probably the better one.
Yeah.
Like from a spy perspective far away.
Yeah, they were seeing them from a distance, but were able to see that they were much larger people.
Yo, that fucker huge. Go tell Moses.
Anyway.
I don't remember that in the Charlton Heston movie.
Anyway, so the spies returned, and their account was so terrifying that the people rebelled against God and refused to enter the promised land. So it was so scary that they refused to even try to take it.
What a bunch of pussies.
But eventually, during the conquest of Canaan, Joshua expelled the Anakim from the hill country, which I guess the promised land, and Caleb finally drove them out of Hebron completely. However, a small remnant found refuge in the cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. So this is, in the time of basically Moses, Joshua, all that, they drive out these giants, and supposedly they kill like all of them, and then they...
How do you kill these?
Through battle.
But they're size...
they're large, but they're not unkillable.
David was super small, and he killed the giant Goliath.
The Goliath is only like twice his size.
They're human still. I mean, like,
I'm still imagining
maybe partially inhuman.
Well, they're half human.
But yeah. Well, no, because if this is just further down the bloodline, it would be mostly human at this point.
Still got angel in there.
Because the Nephilim, the first generation of Nephilim, would have been half human. But then, through years and years of breeding with humans, it would be watered down quite a bit.
I can't help but think that the angel would just overtake most of that.
I don't think that the Nephilim only inbred.
I don't know. It was a different time back then.
But
got to keep it got to keep the bloodline pure.
Anyway, so this about 450 years later, you have more encounters with giants. And this is after they thought to have wiped them out, but they thought, well, they found refuge in some other places.
In the sky.
So when people think about David, they generally think of Goliath. But David and his men actually killed 5 different giants. So that's 5 giants that they claim and have recorded to have encountered. And those giants were Goliath and Lami, who were brothers. Ishbi Benob, which is kind of your Obi-Wan.
No,
Ishbi Benob.
Not even close.
That's what I was referring to earlier when I said that.
That joke.
Saf, and an unnamed giant who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot.
Oh, gross.
Sounds like a pretty inbred boy, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, so they managed to kill
The
5
giants are making
giants.
flipper babies.
And this was during wars with the Philistines.
The Philistines had giants on their side?
Yes,
How did they lose?
they just did.
They had the power of God and anime on their side.
Anyway, so Goliath, like the classic David and Goliath, he is, based on measurements given in different translations, he is somewhere between 6'6" and 9'6".
That's a pretty big window.
That's a pretty big window, but even at 6'6" would be a giant of the time, because the average man was 5.5 feet tall. But
it depends on your definition of giant.
Yeah.
I mean, that means we'd be calling like NBA players giants.
And that's specifically measurements of Goliath. And that's, a dispute in translation of whether he was however many cubits tall or whatever.
How many stones did he
But some of the more clear measurements that you get later of other giants lead me to believe that he was most likely 9'6".
Wait,
That's giant.
is it a window where they're like anywhere between 6'6", 9'6", or is it was 6'6" or it was 9'6"? We just don't know which one it
There are
was.
3
sliding scale
things. It's kind of a sliding scale. There's a 6'6" argument, there's a 9'6" argument, and then there's some who argue somewhere between 7 and 8.
What if we were looking at when you say that they're 6'6", maybe like adolescent giant, not
could
fully
be.
grown?
It could be an age thing.
Well, I think
Goliath was just a baby.
Goliath was a full-grown man.
Yeah,
though.
he was a man.
He struck him down, that toddler of the giants.
But if the range is so big, I mean, you could decide that. Like, giants don't just come out giant.
I don't know.
Probably grow like anything else.
Mama's
Any other
mother.
humanoid.
Mama's got a lot of room down there to pop
That's
out
the
a fully
biggest
grown.
secret is Brian's actually only 3 years old. He's a giant.
I hide it well. I have learned your language.
Brian years.
He still walks around like a toddler, though he kind of hobbles.
I sidestep with my arms out.
So, like I said, I'm leaning towards him being 9'6", given descriptions of later giants that were encountered. And that would be another race of giants that's mentioned in the Bible, which is the Rephaim or the Rephaim or whatever that I said earlier, that were also known as the Zuzim and the Emim. That was just different people in the area referred to them as different names. And basically the word Rephaim means giant. They describe them as the Rephaim or the Rephaites. Describes them as giants, and the name literally means terrible ones.
That seems aggressive.
Yeah, so they were a separate race of giants. They were separate from the Anakim that were believed to have lived in Canaan. And the main reason that they're considered to be separate is because people will make references in the same verse to the Anakim and the Rephaim, as if they're 2 separate things.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the notable Rephaim was Og, the king of Bashan, and he was considered to be the last Rephaim in his lands. And we don't get a measurement of his body, but for some reason it says his bed was 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide.
Well, that doesn't mean shit, because anyone can lay in that bed and still be using that bed.
Yeah, but
That sounds like it was a family model.
in a time where things were not very luxurious.
Yeah, and also were typically made for specific people, not like
or families.
Manufactured at, high volumes.
With a bed that size, let's say maybe like 11 feet.
Or a bed, could have just been back then a blanket on the ground.
Most of the things that I found, they described most of the giants encountered to be somewhere between 9 and 11 feet tall, which is why Goliath, that dispute 6'6", 9'6", it's most likely that if the other accounts are accurate, that he would have been around 9'6".
I'm sticking to the adolescent theory.
Yeah. Another thing
but
is...
he was full grown. Like, we know he was full grown.
Yeah, but they are saying of multiple giants that they encountered, 6'6" to 9'6". So there's more than just one.
That was specifically Goliath he was referencing.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it was specifically Goliath that had that measurement dispute.
Okay.
They killed his baby boy.
And another thing is that there was the unnamed giant who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot.
Yeah, I think the Acer killed him.
That has led a lot of people to believe that all of these giants had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. But given the fact that they didn't even catch his name but managed to know, hey, this guy's got 6 fingers and 6 toes, leads me to believe that
he was a huge
he was
bitch.
odd for a giant. So I'm thinking he was maybe one of the only ones that had 6 fingers and 6 toes.
Were these giants naming themselves, or were these given names from the people that encountered them?
I don't actually know.
Well, maybe they just gave him the names, and they were like, well,
I think
he's
Goliath,
a 6-finger, 6-toe guy.
Goliath, I believe, was actually
I think Goliath was like
Goliath,
announced by his side.
Goliath was later used as a name for other giants because his brother Lami was also referred to as Goliath in the Bible because it's a Goliath, it's a giant, but he was actually his brother and his name was Lami.
Sounds like that 6-finger, 6-toe guy could have been like a staple of the community, stand-up guy.
He could have been. But anyway, so the Rephaim and Og, the king of Bashan, were supposedly defeated by Moses and his Israelite army, and apparently him and all of his sons were killed that we know of. I mean, it could be they say, yeah, we won, we killed him and all of his sons. But it is possible that him and maybe some of the other giants found refuge elsewhere. They said there were these 3 cities. They encountered more of them 450 years after thinking they had driven them all out. So it could be there were families of these giants all over the world that had escaped or were spread out from the flood or whatever.
It's also a pretty bold assumption to think after one battle you wiped out an entire species.
Yeah, well, I mean, they weren't. So basically, the Anakim lived in a place called Ammon, and they were known to the people called the Ammonites that lived in that area as the people who were there before but were driven out. So the Ammonites didn't really have experiences with the Anakim. They just knew, they were here before us and they got driven out. So even then, they thought they were gone, but not even through a battle. They thought that, God wiped them out. There's a lot to it, because the Ammonites actually were sort of a people of the Amorites. So you're looking at, 3... There's a region, and that includes Ammon and Bashan, which all kind of falls under the nation of Amor, I think. It was the people that the Amorites were from. And so Og was the king of Bashan, and he was a giant. So, I think that most of them that were in civilization, I think there were few, but they were basically put in positions of power or used as champions. But, I mean, that's not to say that there weren't thousands of them, even millions of them somewhere else,
That's definitely how Goliath was used.
Yeah.
Was as a champion,
yes.
They put him forward, this is our guy, and then David
hit him with a rock.
Even moving forward in Greek mythology and stuff, you find
that's exactly
guys
where
that
we're
are
going.
Like that.
That's exactly where we're going. So a little bit later, we have Greek giants. This is a quote from the Greek historian Solinus, and this is from AD 200. Before there were any humans on Paline, the story goes that a battle was fought between the gods and the giants. Traces of the giants' demise continue to be seen to this day. Whenever torrents swell with rain, and an excessive water breaks their banks and floods the fields, they say that even now in gullies and ravines, the people discover bones of immeasurable enormity, like men's carcasses, but bigger. So, one of the things that has been brought up with that, and, this Greek historian saying, yeah, we have found bones of giant humans, and then, the whole idea of the Cyclops in Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Some historians believe that what they were actually finding was elephant skulls, and the central nasal cavity they would think was an eye socket. And an elephant skull, if you were to take their eye sockets and consider them to be ear holes, and then where the teeth would be, they're like, oh, well, we didn't find the lower jaw, we just found this thing. They could think, it was a giant one-eyed human. But
didn't some cyclops depicted with almost like tusks or long teeth too? Yeah.
Which would make sense if they were going from, hey, we found this elephant skull, what would this have looked like? I mean, I don't know that they had the science, but they did have the imagination.
Yeah. No.
There's also evidence now with the science, though, that we've seen some animals with elongated skulls and stuff that actually were born with one eye. So it could have been confused as that situation.
Yeah,
maybe.
There's also the elongated human skulls, but that was man-made.
Yeah, that was done through a
leather binding on the child's head. Yeah.
We need to bring back foot binding.
No.
That's disgusting.
I don't want to look at somebody's foot and be like, that's a you.
So then in Morocco, the people of Tingis, which is modern-day Tangier, Morocco, once boasted that their city's founder was a giant named Antaeus, who was buried in a mound south of town. To test the claim, Roman soldiers dug into the mound in 81 BC. Much to their surprise, an enormous skeleton surfaced, which they then reburied with great honors. Modern scientists confirm that ancient elephant fossils are common in the area. So
that dude died, and he was like, yo,
it could have been a giant,
put these bones,
or it could have been they found a huge rib cage, and were like, oh man, giant bones, and then just stopped digging.
That dude died, and then he was like,
hadn't they seen, I know they didn't have the technology to actually verify bones and stuff, but hadn't they seen
dead
large animals and been oh, maybe this is that?
I would think so. I think that in modern day, we're assuming way too much ignorance.
Yeah, exactly.
In ancient times, I would think that the average person would have seen many more dead animals than the average person today.
100%.
Because, they're dealing with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
They deal with a lot of death back then.
Committed a lot too.
Another one, which to me has always been one of the most interesting stories,
Paul Bunyan,
is the story of the Glastonbury giant. So the Glastonbury giant was allegedly unearthed in 1190 on the orders of King Henry II. This was following rumors that the legendary King Arthur was in fact buried in Glastonbury between two ancient pyramid-shaped pillars at Glastonbury in Somerset, England. So workers dug down to a depth of 7 feet, and they found a leaden cross with the inscription, I'm going to butcher this Latin, Hic jacet sepultus inclitus rex Arturus in insula Avalloni.
That was the most redneck sounding Latin I've ever heard.
Do better.
Pass it around. Let's get that reading comprehension going.
I agree.
So that
pass it around. Let's all give that a whirl.
Yeah, let's start with Brian.
So
please.
Oh, man.
That translates to, on this lead cross, which was 7 feet long, it translates to, here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon. So the discovery of this cross inspired the excavators to dig even further in the hope of finding solid proof of the legend's existence. And at 16 feet deep, they finally struck a large coffin, hollowed out from the trunk of an old oak tree. Inside, they discovered the skeletal remains of a man who had once measured to be close to 9 feet tall, laid next to the skeleton of an average-sized woman, assumed at the time to be Arthur's queen, Guinevere, as covered in detail in The Myth of Man by J.P. Robinson.
And the average woman, I imagine, is maybe 4.5 to 4'6",
That dude
7-ish.
That dude broke her.
They mention in the story that many skeletons measuring 9 feet tall have been found all over the globe, with many examples having been discovered in the United States in particular.
Big old engine.
This supposed skeleton of King Arthur that was 9 feet tall was examined by I believe he was a Roman.
Did you just say King Arthur?
Yes, King Arthur.
Was believed to have been
The
9 feet
giant.
tall.
Yeah, have you not been listening to this at all?
Yeah, I have.
They found
Like,
what they believed to be the grave of King Arthur and found a skeleton in there that was 9 feet tall, buried next to a woman of average size.
Wow, man.
So they're like, whoa, this is him and his queen.
Movies got that one way wrong.
Yeah.
Charlie Hunnam's about 9 foot.
So
Saber's pretty
as
big.
far
in my
as
heart.
we know, the presence of this giant is not disputed. The actual find of the giant figure is not really up for dispute, as the respected historian Giraldus Cambrensis personally examined the massive bones in 1194 and pronounced them to be genuine. Then, hundreds of years later, in 1962 to 63, archaeologist Dr. Raleigh Radford studied the ancient giant remains following additional excavations of the site and confirmed that a prominent personage had indeed been buried there at the period in question. So, there's not really any dispute that in Glastonbury, they did find a 9-foot-tall skeleton that may or may not have been King Arthur, who is a figure that we don't even know if he was real or not. You know, he's a mythic figure. So maybe he was real, maybe he was a giant, and that's why he inspired so much, you know, legend and mythology, folklore.
Well, sure, yeah. And what if somewhere along the way, like, he was originally described as a giant, and then it got to the point where people were like, oh, that's bogus, and so that's why it was lost, like, whether or not he was actually...
Yeah, people quit
real.
believing
Yes,
it because they quit believing the giant stature.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be. But, I mean, most of the legends of Arthur don't even mention that he was, you know, gigantic. It wasn't until finding this skeleton that they thought, whoa, maybe he was giant.
Sounds like they dug up the wrong guy.
What were you saying?
No, I find it amazing that, like, with this, like, multitudes of proof that have been like, no, there was definitely someone here that was 9 feet tall, that was just like,
Well, that was back in 1100.
No,
No,
the most
in
recent thing was in
1962
62 and
Oh, I thought you said
63.
11.
It was first checked in 1194 by a historian, but then
Like-
again in 1962 by an archaeologist.
Like, we
think
just
they just-
dust that under the rug that there was a 9-foot fucking person that we believe to be King Arthur, and we're just like,
well, the theory
I don't
is,
think so.
The theory is that they did.
Well,
As
they
that article
should've.
mentioned, there were multiple skeletons of this size found all throughout the world, especially in the United States.
Wait, you're saying the theory is that they intentionally...
Yes, this is
But
intentionally
why?
being covered up.
Like,
We'll
what?
get there.
Oh, okay.
Merlin granted them.
No, like, is it intentionally being covered up, or because there's so many corpses found of this stature at that time, did they just leave it out of the lore because that was fucking
No,
normal?
we're not talking about the lore. We're talking about the history of humankind and the idea of giants.
Yeah, the history of humankind is based on the lore, right? It's what people write down.
No,
Yeah, but I imagine
no,
there
because
wasn't-
our
there wasn't
archaeological
enough.
history, like the history of humankind, we don't make record of giants. We have Homo sapien, Neanderthal, now Homo Longi, which was larger. Which
What about
does
the Dragon Man? I thought
lead
that
some-
was like
that's
an-
Homo
That's
Longi,
Longi.
Okay, yeah.
which does lend some credence to the giant idea. But so far, the entire idea of giants has been ignored in like the archaeological community. And the question is whether that's intentional or if it's just that all of these findings are fake.
Does this idea ever run transition in with like the idea of like a Bigfoot and stuff, Sasquatches?
No, but
Not
hey,
related at all, right?
could be.
But
Could
hey,
be
man.
the Sasquatch is a surviving giant, but
They're
King Arthur was a hairy
but
motherfucker.
the thing is
No,
that the giants of the time did integrate with society,
Yeah.
and Bigfoot does not.
But then you went back to what you were saying earlier, how the people, the Amorites, I believe, drove out the people who were originally there that were said to be giant people.
Mm-hmm.
What if here, like,
and
we drove them out, and that's what Bigfoots
that's the big
are
thing
now?
is that, you know, there's been so many of these remains found in the United States
Is that insane?
they thought them to be completely driven out because they may have gone all the way to what is today the United States, and no one ever heard from them again.
They took the land bridge through Alaska.
They're on like the Bulls and the Pacers and the...
So anyway,
Larry Bird is a giant.
one of the things
I've seen him in real life.
He's a fucking
pretty
giant.
big.
one of the things that causes problems with the whole idea of giants is
No skeleton on record.
either satire or an intentional fake article in order to make the whole thing look like a joke. There's a town called Rockwall, Texas. And in Rockwall, Texas, they are named for a very large rock wall that is partially under the ground, which would lead you to believe that it was built a very long time ago. And there's a lot of dispute over whether it was man-made or if it was, naturally formed somehow. Supposedly the conclusion these days using, they did some kind of, I can't remember what it was called, but some kind of magnetic polarity test on the rocks that make up the wall to determine that basically all of them had the same polarity, which would mean that they were naturally formed there and had always been there. But the question is, with the way that magnetism is, and that, like, say you take a magnet and you rub it on a nail,
How the fuck
you
they
can
work?
magnetize the nail. So say you built a rock wall a long, long, long time ago, eventually being in proximity to each other would gain the same polarity. So
Especially
that's-
with natural erosion and then rubbing with each
no
other
way
and
of
stuff.
really knowing whether it was
I'm gonna
man-made
say I've
or
seen
natural.
The naturally occurring, perfectly geometric hexagons. So I'm not even gonna question that if nature could form that shit or not.
So the thing out of Rockwall that's interesting is that there was an article in the paper that said that basically this guy, when he was plowing his field, he ended up turning up a large skull, and it was very large human skull. And so he told,
what year was this?
I don't remember exactly when this was. This was like this article came in like the 20s or 30s.
Oh, so recent enough to where they should have known if it was
Yes.
Industrial times.
Yes.
100 years ago.
So he, told some people, and they decided to excavate the site. And they found under the ground a large chamber with black marble pillars that was 60 feet by 100 feet, which ran up against the wall of Rockwall, Texas. And
Underneath?
well, no, at the time they would have been on the same level. Okay. Just erosion and time. You know how you have to excavate ancient sites?
Yeah.
Oh, so they're saying that wall was potentially a part of this, whatever you're about to get to.
Yeah, it was possibly a wall built to surround their town or city, whatever. So in this chamber,
What round?
they found sandals that were 3 feet long and 10 inches wide,
What round?
and a huge trunk and a giant bed. So this was assumed to be like the home of some kind of giant person. Supposedly the remains that were found and all of the artifacts were shipped off to the Smithsonian. The problem with the article is that it was written by a man named Sam Slick. So
Sounds like a pretty
slick.
trustworthy guy.
yeah, so the question is, was this a real article and this was this guy's real name, or was this a satire article with a satirical name on it? But
Called him Trusty Sam.
there was a man recently who, I didn't write his name down, but he did a documentary for, I believe, Discovery or Nat Geo, where he was going through hundreds of articles from the 1920s and the 1930s of giant remains being found all over the country and being sent to the Smithsonian. So there is a conspiracy that the Smithsonian is intentionally covering up the existence of giants and preventing more from being found through NAGPRA. And NAGPRA is the Native American Graves... Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. So, what this did was, there is a legend, throughout the U.S. and especially in Ohio. There are these mysterious large mounds that appear to be man-made. And there have been legends that these mounds were built by giants, and that there are structures underneath these mounds that were their buildings and things like that. And the theory actually came to prominence from the Andrew Jackson administration. And the modern narrative is that Andrew Jackson made it up so that they could claim that these lands were built by a superior race of giants and that the Native Americans took their land, so then they could justify kicking the Native Americans off of that land.
Modern narrative according to who?
According to some guy whose blog I read.
Okay.
Basically...
Yeah, that sounds
because I was trying to say, is this part of the cover up, or is this?
So supposedly this is all part of the cover up.
Okay.
That there's all these legends and ideas of giants built these mounds in North America, and that's why that we were finding all these giant remains and things like that. But the Smithsonian has supposedly been hiding these remains and destroying them, and they signed the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act in 1990 in order to prevent excavation of the mounds.
Yeah.
Saying, no, these are Native American burial grounds. You cannot excavate them. So that would therefore prevent more giant findings.
And essentially,
it would
prove Andrew Jackson correct. Most likely.
Well, no, it's got nothing to do with Andrew Jackson.
No, well, I know, but what he was claiming that
they were built by giants?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the thing is that the whole idea is destroy all the artifacts that were found, all of the remains that were found, and then prevent anyone from excavating sites where they could be found by protecting them under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation
But what I meant was,
Act.
because there's always got to be a motive. If there's a cover-up, there's always got to be a motive to understand what the cover-up was even for.
Is a few things. People debate on what they think the motive is, because, I mean, conspiracy theorists all have their own reasons.
Well, that was my idea for the motive, what I was saying.
Some people argue that they would cover it up because it messes with, like, the order of evolution as we know it, which, to me, that's a dumb idea, because, of course, if there were giants in our evolution, we would keep it. The idea that most people...
science is a plastic thing. It reshapes based on what we find and understand.
Not anymore. Now it reshapes to fit whatever the government wants it to be.
Are you questioning me? Because if you are, you're questioning science.
Great, Fauci.
Jason Fauci.
The theory that a lot of people believe, and the theory I think would make the most sense, given, our government and the way they are, is that they are hiding evidence of giants because it would lead people to believe that the stories of giants in the Bible are possibly true.
And then we get...
Because if giants were real at some point in our history, well, then maybe the Bible wasn't wrong, and then people might be led to religion. So the idea of destroying the records of giants is to keep people from religion.
But I thought only half of the government didn't want people led to religion.
The establishment doesn't want people to be.
Most of the people looking at these evidence and everything like that, very scientifically driven minds and stuff like that, right? So they don't want to give any proof to religion.
Yes, they wouldn't want to give
stories.
any credence to religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so the theory is that the Smithsonian has been destroying all of these, and then the government is helping them prevent any more from being found by signing that NAGPRA Act. And the interesting thing about it is...
Hold on.
Don't answer a phone call. Oh, that's fine. Bush apple. So, anyway...
Distraction. Smoke ball.
But yeah, the interesting thing about it is that it was constant. There was news articles all through the 20s and 30s, like giant remains being found.
Well, that's when
and they're all being sent to the Smithsonian, and then no one's ever hearing from them again.
Well, that was the same time as the Great Bone Race, when those two paleontologists were going around everywhere and digging up bones.
Absolutely. So yeah, there was a lot being done in paleontology at the time, but for some reason we kept all the records of dinosaurs and none of the records of giants. And who knows why. But there was also an article that came around years ago. Supposedly it was a joke, but some people said it was a leaked thing. But it was basically a statement from the Smithsonian, like admitting that yes, they have destroyed all of these giant remains for years. And I don't remember the whole story on that, but basically some people said, oh, this is a leaked statement from them that they didn't want to get out. And then the Smithsonian says, oh no, it was a joke because of the conspiracy theorists. But I couldn't find the statement anymore.
Did you try DuckDuckGo instead of
I
Google?
did. I actually had to, for a lot of the, okay, so I was able to find all the biblical stuff through Google, but for any of the conspiracy stuff about the Smithsonian and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, I had to go to DuckDuckGo because Google will give you no conspiracy theories anymore.
Yeah, I've pretty much taken to using only DuckDuckGo for podcast research.
Yeah, because Google is garbage.
I'm not bashing it all, but I'm still going back to what I said. Is this a possible, like, situation of where, like, the whole, like, Bigfoot thing could have came up?
Sure.
Seriously.
Feral giants.
Yeah, feral giants, man.
Like Jason said, the Nephilim only inbred.
I believe that was him.
That was Brian. Brian.
So we only have, now we have these deformed,
big, hairy
Bigfoot, yeah.
But there was recent Bigfoot news. I found it when I was researching yesterday.
Okay, what is it?
There was a Bigfoot sighted not far from us in Ohio.
Oh yeah, they're constant in southern Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
there's a lot of sightings in southern Ohio.
Near the Mud Mermaids.
Maybe make a road trip on our way to the Mothman Festival this year. Stop it in Ohio and look for Bigfoot. But I don't know, the whole idea of it, like the Nephilim has always been a really interesting topic to me, and I tried to stick with only the what is considered to be the inspired or canonical Bible references, but there are more references from the time period in like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilee, and the writings of Josephus, who was a historian at the time, and they go into more detail on the Nephilim and on giants, but a lot of people disregard those writings because they're not, of the official Bible. So I tried to stick to just the official stuff, but there's definitely a lot out there in regards to the Nephilim. And
the Nephilim seem completely legitimate.
Yeah, and so, well, if you're religious.
Well, yeah.
And that's the thing. You have to...
The angel part of it, at least.
Because if you don't go from
Fallen
a
angels.
religious perspective, we have almost no evidence of giants because it is either all been hoaxes or the Smithsonian has destroyed it and hidden any of it, and prevented any of it from being found anymore. So, your main evidence of giants is found in the Bible and other writings from the time period.
What would be the motive of trying to prevent proof of the Bible?
Oh, this is quite simple.
Religious fervor.
The government is evil.
Well, that's a very simple
listen
answer.
to last week's episode.
Yeah, I did. That's a very simple, because I almost
that is
wonder.
The simplest way to put it is that.
Sure,
well,
but
for one, also, as I think it was Jason who said that, or Austin that said, these are very scientific-minded people that are analyzing it, and so giving any credence to religion would kind of invalidate some of the things they have said.
Yeah, but
yes,
if you go into it with a scientific mind, you have to assume all outcomes are a possibility.
I think what you're missing with what I'm saying is, if they think that these giant remains would be so significant in lending credence to religion, how did not one of them question if it was real and be like, maybe we should?
Well, and that's the thing. There are people out there. There are people that look into this stuff, and like I said, there was a guy a few years ago who did a documentary going over all of these articles from the 20s and 30s of these remains being found and basically saying Where are they? What did the Smithsonian do with them? Why were these not major historical finds? I mean, we've got the Glastonbury giant that isn't even disputed, and nobody talks about it.
That's what I found odd. As much as there is to believe that that was actually true and that really happened on multiple occasions, and no one says anything, why? That's boggling.
Exactly. There's got to be some kind of conspiracy there.
To what you were saying about the whole, like, science people saying it and giving, credence to religion or whatever, when you think about the average person, not someone who sat here and done the research like you have, when you just talk about the Bible, what are like some of the biggest stories that you think about? If you say the word giant and Bible, any common person who knows anything is going to say David and Goliath.
Even if you just say Bible, if you aside from Jesus, people are going to be like David and Goliath, Noah and the flood.
Yep.
Two things that are giant related.
And those are two of like the most common, most massive things.
And also, would that be the reason why Goliath is often cited as 6'6" instead of 9'6"? Because people are like, well, actually, he's probably not actually a giant.
Yeah, it's more along that line, but it more has to do with a argument over Hebrew translation.
Yeah, I was going to say that seems to be.
Yeah, it's more an issue with translation.
Yeah,
or he's an adolescent.
But he was documented as a full-grown man.
No, he was the size of a full-grown man.
It doesn't actually say that he was fully.
No, I know,
grown.
but he was.
He supposedly also had like 4 brothers, I think. So there's more giants that were not documented as killed because only one of his brothers was killed.
Mentioned?
Yeah, Lamy was killed, but the other ones aren't really mentioned, other than the fact that he had other brothers. I would assume that these giants reproduced quite a bit.
Or they just killed everybody that tried to.
I mean,
their drive was just.
I mean, these
insatiable.
are the champions. These are people in prominent positions. Og was a king. And,
he speared through everybody and was like, "Fuck, they got another one." Throw it to the side.
One of the more interesting things about the Nephilim to me has always been that not all of them were giants. Some of them had what would be considered superpowers.
So demigods.
It's like how
that's exactly what
like
you
that,
said,
like that Persian guy.
How many of them were able
Perseus?
to just completely blend into society and just move along, which could lead to now generations later why some people have strange abilities.
Hancock. You ever see the movie Hancock?
Shut
Will
the fuck
Smith?
up.
Yeah.
It's a terrible movie.
Hancock is
Are you
he's an
really
angel.
bringing an M. Night Shyamalan movie into
Was
That's
this?
not
Hancock
an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Yes.
Was it really?
Yes.
No, there's no way.
No way.
Yes, it was.
Why wasn't it part of the?
I want
the,
that
the,
looked up now.
Why
No
wasn't
way.
it part of the split
I
glass
swear.
universe?
M. Night Shyamalan?
I swear.
I really don't think so.
I don't think so.
Well,
either.
now I'm second guessing.
The only time fun fact, the only time I ever saw the movie Hancock was at Victor's house.
It was,
Was
better.
Yeah,
It was better than Foot Penis.
we watched it upstairs at your house in like middle school or high school.
Well, yeah, that's
At your
because I was in
grandparents'
my
house.
Will Smith kick.
Yeah, well, yeah, because you look exactly like Will Smith, which is amazing for a man who's half Mexican.
I don't look anything like Will Smith.
He looks a lot like him. Don't let him
It
fool
looks
you all.
exactly like Will Smith.
Just give him a flat
Brian, are
top.
you
He's
looking it
the
up?
Fresh Prince.
It was Peter Berg.
He's definitely the Fresh
Yeah, M.
Prince.
Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, Peter Berg, M. Night Shyamalan, same guy.
That's his
pen name.
That's his Mark Twain name. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a pseudonym.
Totally looks like him too. You know that big skinny white guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
But regardless of the quality of Hancock, the premise there is
That movie came out 13 years ago, by the way.
okay. Thanks.
Oh my god.
Anyway, regardless of the premise,
The idea of they were, superpowered and just continued existing through time. So
Yeah.
your Nephilim that did not become giants, that became superhuman,
yeah,
could,
Until they paired
I
up
think
and
it's
died off.
entirely possible, and that like through generations, like those things would have been watered down, like abilities. But that's why you'd have people with like a sixth sense now, or like people just with strange abilities, even when maybe they're physical, like elite athletes, could be descendants of
Are you
Nephilim.
saying Usain Bolt? is a
Lorraine
Nephilim?
Warren.
I'm saying me, son.
Who's
No.
Lorraine Warren?
Ed and Lorraine
Ed and
Warren.
Lorraine
Yeah, Lorraine
Warren.
Warren was clairvoyant.
Sorry, I don't know their names.
And she was one of the best clairvoyants on record as far as like the testing goes, because she actually submitted to the tests at I don't remember which place.
Princeton.
I know that what they
But
what they
yeah,
were
with
that
the
they
cards and all that. Yeah, she was one of the best they ever tested.
So she was in Ghostbusters, is what I'm hearing.
You know what I was thinking?
did. No, and
I think I was.
I know.
Damn it,
I'm
Brian.
making a joke.
I
Shut the
think I was
fuck up.
mixing up Hancock with Unbreakable.
which was
Yes,
I think I was
obviously
mixing up Hancock with Unbreakable.
Absolutely, you were. That's
I
why
had
I
to-
said, why
yes,
wasn't it in the split glass universe?
Yes.
Yes.
No, I had to.
Unbreakable.
I had to correct myself there.
You just
You know-
needed Will Smith to come in and beat up
Yes,
James McAvoy.
exactly.
completely different actors, not even
Hey,
remotely
they
close to
both
me.
had a train accident.
Hancock had a train accident.
He like threw a train.
No,
No.
he stopped the train
He
from
stopped the
hitting.
train from
Yeah,
hitting
he
him.
stopped a train.
Oh yeah,
Did throw a basketball though.
So the train
Hancock.
that Bruce Willis was on that crashed because Will Smith was standing on the
Exactly.
tracks, stopping it from moving.
From hitting Jason Bateman.
Yes.
Yes.
Was that Jason Bateman? I thought it was the old woman.
So Bruce Willis became a superhero in order to save Jason Bateman's life.
Talk about a
And
full
Will
circle
Smith
situation.
made it all happen.
the Hancock and M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Oh.
What's up, foot
I
penis?
mean, what do you guys think? You think it's possible that there were giants
Well,
in
it's
our
always
past?
possible.
'Cause, like, I'm 100%. I think absolutely there used to be giants.
I 100% believe that there were giants in our past. There is too much that has been talked about historically for there to not be.
So much historically, but yet for some reason, no actual evidence,
You know
no
what?
physical evidence, because it was all sent
You
to
know
the
what this
Smithsonian.
conversation reminds me of, John? This conversation reminds me of dragons.
Oh, just
You
fuck
remember that
off.
conversation?
Brian,
About the dragons?
you are useless tonight.
Am I?
Yes.
We got stories and stories and stories and stories, but we have nothing to show for it besides that.
And I think
And all
dragons.
we got is the word. It's like, hey, we know where one is. Go dig it the fuck up.
I think
Prove it right now.
I think dragons were real.
Good for you.
Well, I think for something like, giants in folklore or dragons in folklore,
Folklore.
Yes. I'm going to say, though.
I want to open a
I-
restaurant called Folklore so
Anyway.
bad now. Oh, that's so good. Folklore.
but the idea that
It's like a gastropub.
the idea that it keeps
Really expensive.
the
You know
idea-
what it does? You have lore on your table as the placemats for like a different event in history.
I have like my expose on giants on
Yeah.
the placemat. Folklore.
Really got forked there.
The prices will really fork you over.
Every time you get a utensil bag that has your knife and fork, it tells you like when the fork and knife were invented, where the spoon was.
this-
We have a
Silverware's
running
like-
screen of recent Bigfoot sightings.
That when you
Anyway.
open up the silverware, it's a fork and cookie.
The fortune cookie was actually made in America.
All of the
Fork and a
fortunes fork
cookie.
you over.
Yeah.
All right,
But
Jason.
they all have a folklore.
I'm just thinking about that. I have final say in the cut that gets released. And I can remove all of that.
Your waiter is called a lore master.
But no, the idea that it keeps popping up over and over again, different cultures, that are geographically separated.
Like dragons.
Maybe there. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like dragons.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I said it. Stupid ass.
That there's something that inspires these stories to keep popping up. Go ahead, continue.
Yeah, another thing was that like the ancient Egyptians and their artwork, we assume that when a person was drawn larger than everyone else, it was because they were of greater importance.
Greater importance or God or.
But how often do we do that now? When you're drawing a picture of people, do you draw someone larger because they're more important to you?
Only
It
if
could
you're a
have
little
just
kid.
been that they were larger.
yeah.
We don't know.
It's so dumb too that like we look back, like you said, where we assume ignorance a lot.
Mhm.
It's like, why do we always look back from now thinking, oh well, this had to have been why they drew them larger? Because
Yeah.
maybe just the biggest guy always got the the top spot because he was the biggest guy.
Might makes it
Yeah.
right back then.
It could be that he was big and important.
Yes.
They may not have just drawn an average sized person larger because they were important.
Well,
And the other thing is that, like, about assuming ignorance is that, like, we have among even the plebs now, everyone has like this certain level of basic intelligence and common sense, and we just assume that because their scientific knowledge was low back then, that people were just walking around going like, "How dare I kill
of the
animal with
stairs.
stick and eat?" Like, people had conversations, they had full lives. Like, why should we assume that they were all so stupid that they couldn't recognize that, hey, this is a giant skeleton? This
Elephant
isn't
skull,
an
yeah.
elephant. They had elephants.
Exactly.
It doesn't take a scientist to look at bones and be like, especially if they found the skull, and be able to tell the difference from something human and something not, because they've all seen human skulls.
Yeah.
well, you can go back and look in ancient drawings and stuff like that. and you can look at them and tell
They understood anatomy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And when they were drawing a picture of an elephant, it looked
It
like
was huge.
a fucking elephant.
Yeah.
And when there was stuff that was in there that was stuff like we haven't seen before, or because of now as much technology and science background that we have, we just assume that like they were just dumb and they didn't get it. They were depicting things that they saw themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we just discredit it all because it happened a long time
And because
ago.
like that was one of the ways that their history was written, especially before like written language. Why would we assume that they would use metaphor in pictures?
They
if that's the
wouldn't.
only way they have to depict something, why would they be like,
and
well, I'm going to
hyperbole.
depict this scary man as a giant bear? You know, like
Yeah,
it doesn't make any
exactly.
sense to do that. If you're
And if
trying to
you-
convey a story accurately, why use metaphor?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because you can't put adjectives on a picture.
You can by drawing it accurately. I can draw a fat man by drawing him fat. That's an
Round.
adjective. Like,
Yeah, but how do you a king? Like, how do you denote
A
a
crown.
king?
a
Whatever
crown
they do,
or
because-
whatever it is that they would have worn at the time
Yes,
to denote
exactly.
them in public as a king.
Or he's in a fancy chair, or he's
the same way
surrounded
they would
by
have been denoted in
jewels, or-
society at the time. You know, and if there was nothing that they wore that denoted them as that,
And also with things like large animals, like an elephant, for example, I feel like they often depicted that accurately size-wise. Like they didn't make elephants gigantic with like these tiny little people next to them. Like they could
Yeah.
still recognize
they
size.
understood scale.
Yes.
Well, you got to
exactly.
remember they also would draw predatory animals as giant. Like lions and tigers aren't that much bigger than us.
Some of
When
that,
you
some
go
of them
back
at
to
that
when
time
they
may
were
have been.
depicting those, like a
Yeah.
saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah, that's 10,000
something
years
like
ago.
that.
I'm talking like 2,000. Like when they were depicting.
Well, 2,000
predator-
years ago, we weren't looking at cave paintings.
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm
A
saying.
lot of,
Like,
a
you're
lot of
looking at
cultures still
writings.
used it 2,000 years ago. Yes, the Romans and a lot of them had their written stuff, but there was also a lot of just pictures still in certain societies. And when they would draw things, like in India, it's like they didn't have a set on every part of it. They would draw the tigers as giant man-eaters.
Anyway, one of the things that
It sucks when somebody keeps interrupting you every 10 seconds.
you have
doesn't
a
it?
point, but one of the things I forgot to mention, and this isn't meant to come off as, and I mean it's going to, but one of the reasons that the whole idea of the mound builders persisted, and that it's odd that the government has insisted that the mounds and whatever may be beneath them was built by the Native Americans, is the fact that at the time that when people settled here, the Native Americans had not built any permanent structures. They didn't have permanent structures and civilizations. They didn't have anything built from stone. And
Yeah,
so
they were very
the idea that these
migratory.
already buried mounds that could contain structures and things underneath them were definitely built by the Native Americans was just a little odd, which is another reason why the conspiracy persists.
Where is it the mounds are located?
Why
again?
should we believe that they built this big civilization here that was just long forgotten, but it was all by the same people? Why would they have like abandoned it and let it fall to ruin if they were the only people
Natives
here?
didn't natives most often follow?
herds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
those were the ones
traveled
on
a
the
lot.
plains.
Yeah,
They
they did
didn't
not
have
live
the
in
ability-
permanent civilizations.
Yeah.
The ones in the plains did.
Especially
The ones
stone.
that lived in the south and northeast had permanent residence.
Yeah, but permanence is measured by how well it can stand the test of time. Generally, when someone goes out to build a permanent civilization, they build solid structures out of stone or wood done in an architectural way. It wasn't, very small hut structures, things like that. Those aren't considered to be permanent civilizations.
Again, I'm going to ask, where were the mounds located?
Mostly in Ohio, but
Ohio,
throughout the
okay.
Northeast and some in the Midwest. They're kind of scattered throughout the country, but the
gonna say, my only
majority
thing-
of them are in Ohio.
The only thing I could have was if it's in Ohio that
there you go.
I could put like, hey, there's some skepticism here. Is
There's
a
lots
lot of the
Bigfoot
hills
sightings
on
in
the
Ohio.
east hills of Ohio could have just been cleared of vegetation by the Indians.
Yes,
to use as vantage
as
points.
like foothills of the Appalachians,
Yeah.
but these are very clearly Like, if you look up like the mountains of Ohio, they're very clearly man-made.
I've seen
They are
the
separate
picture.
from the Appalachians.
Well, dude, we've both driven through it.
And-
we know that every once in a while there's just a random mountain
And
through
that's,
there.
that's why the official government explanation is that, of course, they're Native American burial grounds. You better not excavate them.
That's not true.
But, I mean, there's something I'm going to do an episode on in the future about, like, pyramids around the world that have been since covered by soil, that there were a lot more ancient civilizations than we realize.
I was just recently near some old ancient
Oh, yes, you were
civilizations and
just in
stuff.
Mexico.
I was very, very close to Chichen Itza. One of the very big
Yeah.
ones.
Well, tune in next week for Jason, and,
Have fun, everybody.
yeah.
Whoa.